There has been a coordinated effort to suppress the price of XRP since XRP's inception. And in this video, I want to talk about the coordinated effort that really has been hidden behind the scenes, why it happened, and why I think it's about to go away very quickly. For those of you who don't know, XRP is one of the few digital assets that had a very different launch than most other cryptocurrencies out there. And this is something that's brought a lot of negative sentiment towards XRP. Now, the word on the street, essentially from the OGs in the cryptocurrency industry, is that Ripple's just some super greedy company. It's just one big funding mechanism for Ripple, the company, and pretty much XRP is a worthless token that only goes to generate profits from Ripple. That's the story you've been told. But when you actually look at the truth of the matter, it's going to open up some shocking discoveries. And I think the way we need to start looking at the truth is how other tokens are launched. If you take a look at the vast majority of tokens out there, they launch during something called an ICO phase. And essentially what that ICO phase is these cryptocurrency networks, right, the people who spin them up, go to all the biggest venture capital places out there. And essentially they give away free tokens in exchange for investments in the project. So the blockchain doesn't exist yet. What they do is they say, hey, we'll give you 10% of the supply if you give us X amount of money. Now, what this does is it creates perverse incentives for these VCs, which are investment firms, right? They have a coordinated effort to increase the price of the token so that these investment firms can ultimately cash out. Have you ever wondered why there's so many bullish VCs on these random projects that seem to crash 99% as soon as they're listed on an exchange? Well, the reason is because they want to pump up the value of that token, so ultimately they can sell it off on retail's head. Now, Bitcoin is one of the few exceptions here because a lot of these VCs were so early into crypto, they got a whole bunch of cheap early Bitcoin. They didn't care, and also a lot of them, right, were already allocated to Bitcoin in the first place, so they're just going to pump Bitcoin because they see it as the leader in the space. But what's really interesting is when you look at the amount of sentiment, the amount of CNBC interviews, the amount of people talking about things like Solana and Ethereum versus XRP. And this begs the question because a lot of people will say, oh, Solana has better tokenomics, or oh, Ethereum's more decentralized. But these things are the furthest thing from the truth. In fact, both Solana and Ethereum rely on something called proof of stake. Now, proof of stake, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it's problematic. The reason it's problematic is because the richest people control the protocol. The more Ethereum or more Solana you have, the more you control the network. Now, that's a huge problem with any decentralized payment application because if I want to take control of the network, it shouldn't be that if I have more money than you, I get to control the rules. That doesn't make any sense. And this is the big thing where, in my opinion, these VCs just expect people to not actually follow up and do research on this stuff. The real reason why they care so much about Ethereum and Solana is because they have a bunch of cheap tokens. They got in early on an ICO. They have all these founder level tokens, and therefore for them, it's like free money. Just pump the money up as much as you possibly can, get as much as possible. They barely even had to pay for it. They paid pennies on the dollar, and therefore they're gonna go talk to the market and say, hey, these are the things you need to pay attention to. They're essentially talking their book. Now, the reason why this doesn't happen with XRP to the same degree is because Ripple didn't have an ICO. Instead, what Ripple said was, hey, we don't need all this money to launch this project. It launched so early, and they had so much on-the-ground bootstrapped adoption, they didn't need to go do all these gimmicks to try to get people to put in money, raise all these different developers to come in and build on the project. They already had a lot of that organically from the launch. So what Ripple said is, hey, rather than us selling these tokens to VCs that are going to dump and profit off our essentially diligence and work, we'll just sell the tokens ourselves. We don't need to give away all this XRP to all these people because we have all the funding, we have all the money we need, and we don't need them. The VCs didn't take this very well, right? They were saying, you need us, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And it's a threat to their business model, right? Imagine if everyone did what Ripple did. Essentially, the VCs wouldn't be getting these free early tokens, and it would essentially render them useless. So all the biggest money in crypto, not all of it, but a lot of the big money in crypto took this as a shot, right? They said, oh, you don't think you need us? Oh, you think you can do this on your own? Well, we control the money, so we're going to put together these coordinated FUD campaigns. We're going to go on CNBC, and we're only going to talk about X, Y, and Z. We're going to completely leave XRP out of the discussion. And they turned it into this narrative, right, of, oh, Ripple's dumping all this XRP. Meanwhile, they're dumping all their Solana, they're dumping all their Sui, they're dumping all their Ethereum. The only difference is none of that money being generated is going back into the project. The benefit of what Ripple's doing is, at least when they sell XRP for a profit, you know that money is going to grants. You know that money is going to building out the XRP ledger ecosystem. You know that money is going to Ripple, who, right, is one of the biggest stewards of XRP. If Ripple sold all its XRP to hedge fund B, right, and that hedge fund sold all their XRP or is selling all their XRP for profit, guess what? They don't care. They're just going to go do whatever they want with the money. It doesn't get reinvested into the ecosystem. So a lot of the biggest money in the ecosystem saw this as a shot. They saw it as, hey, you don't think we're needed? Well, guess what? We're going to do X, Y, and Z to prove we're needed. And therefore, every project will go through this ICO process of essentially relying on us and paying us to be part of this entire process. Now, the good news is that I do think this is going to change very quickly. And the reason for that is because, well, guess what? The VCs can only contribute so much money, right? A lot of the big foundations, hedge funds, and big investment firms, they don't want to be in this ICO game, right? Like, it's kind of sketchy, it's dodged a lot of regulations, and at the end of the day, they just want their investors to be getting the best deal. They want their investors to be getting the best assets. And if you look at any Google search term right now, if you look at any kind of market sentiment data, XRP is leading the way. And that's because most people who understand crypto see right through the BS. They see that there's nothing special about Solana compared to XRP, or nothing special about Sui compared to XRP. They're just different projects, right? But the whole VC backing and narrative has turned almost into a negative, because people realize that these VCs don't care about the projects, right? If Solana goes away tomorrow, what do they care? They're just going to sell all their tokens out anyway because they got them for fractions of a penny, and they're just going to dump them on the open market. They all come running and screaming about how, oh, Ripple's profiting on XRP. But the reason they're saying that is because they want to be profiting on the XRP. And the sooner you start to understand these inner workings of the cryptocurrency industry and kind of these dark people who hide behind the scenes and look to make this stuff happen the way it does, the sooner you'll realize that none of these people are actually saying anything they're saying based off the fundamentals of the assets, based off what's coming, based off of shifts in regulation, based off Ripple's progress. They don't care about you making any money. All they care about is not being the last one to hold the bag that they're currently holding. And for them, because they didn't get any cheap XRP in the early days, what does it benefit them to go out and pump XRP? All their money is in cheap Solana tokens that, essentially, they were gifted. But the good news is that's not how markets work, right? You don't just scheme an IPO for a company and suddenly you have the biggest company on the stock market. That's not how these things take place. You get to be the biggest company in the stock market by having good fundamentals. You get to be the most powerful organization in the world by having a strong company, by having a real product, by having real-world adoption, not by having a whole bunch of promoters. And the people stepping inside of the cryptocurrency industry now are going to be those large traditional funds, those large traditional investment managers who are not going to be looking for these schemes and not going to be looking for, oh, well, we didn't get this fraction of a penny. They haven't even stepped in, right? They're analyzing the market completely different than the people did of the past. And this is going to force these VCs to say, hey, this is going to get embarrassing if we continue to be bearish on XRP. Because everyone else is bullish on it, and XRP is outperforming Ethereum, outperforming Solana, outperforming Bitcoin. It doesn't look good when you're running around saying, oh, we're anti-XRP because we didn't get any cheap tokens. Meanwhile, XRP is performing better than all these other assets. So they're going to be forced to shift, essentially, their narrative. And you've already seen it happening. People like Mike Novogratz coming out and saying, okay, we're now pro-XRP. Whether or not that's real or not, who cares? The point is this shift in the narrative is starting to hit them hard. They can no longer afford to be wrong on all these things because people are going to start coming to them and saying, well, why should I trust you? You got XRP completely wrong. And what are they supposed to say? Oh, we didn't get any cheap tokens? So this coordinated manipulation effort only could go so far. As soon as the market started to step in and understand these things, it was never going to work because the market gets past the manipulation. It gets past these campaigns. It gets past these people essentially trying to impose their will on the market dynamics. Ultimately, free markets are going to win out, and XRP is the perfect example of this. No matter how hard everyone tried, they couldn't suppress it because the market wanted it. And as you continue to look at demand, right, ETFs, the vast majority of the new ETFs that aren't Bitcoin are coming in for XRP because that's where the market demand is. That is where these large firms know people want to be positioned. They want to be positioned in XRP. So ultimately, this VC manipulation FUD campaign is going to die out. They can't be wrong forever, and guess what? They will be wrong if they continue to do things in the interest of generating and pumping their own bags, rather than doing things from a smart, savvy investor mentality. Take a look at the largest companies in the stock market today. I guarantee you not a single one is there because of the way they structured their shares during the IPO. Every single one of them is there because they are building useful products that are going to be game-changing for the long run, and that is exactly how Ripple has always positioned XRP. Guys, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this update, and for now, Mickle out.